Wyoming Territory, 1873. The thunderous rattle of hooves echoed across the rolling prairie as Caleb Foster squinted into the punishing midday sun. At 24, he already commanded respect among the seasoned drovers of the Foster Ranch outfit. His chestnut hair, perpetually tousled by the relentless Wyoming wind, framed a face weathered just enough to tell stories of nights under stars and days chasing wayward cattle, yet youthful enough to reveal his true age when he smiled. "Rider coming," shouted Jonas, the oldest hand in their small company of 7 cowboys. Caleb rose in his stirrups, broad shoulders tensing beneath his faded blue cotton shirt as he spotted the lone figure galloping frantically toward them. "Hold steady, boys," he called, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had earned him leadership of the outfit despite his youth. The rider, a rail-thin man with desperation etched into every line of his dust-caked face, reined his lathered horse to a sliding stop. "Thank the Lord," he wheezed. "Been riding for hours looking for help. Catch your breath, mister," Caleb said, dismounting with fluid grace. "What's happened?" "Name's Pearson. Our wagon train, 23 families bound for Oregon. We've been turned around for days. Guide took sick and died 3 nights back. Storm washed out our landmarks. We're nearly out of water, and there's children suffering." Caleb's green eyes narrowed thoughtfully. The summer cattle drive was nearly complete. Just 3 more days to the railhead at Cheyenne. Diverting now meant delays. Men explaining to his father why the Foster cattle arrived late to market. But the alternative? Where's this wagon train now? Maybe 15 miles northeast, in a shallow valley. Some confusion about whether to press on or turn back. Pearson's voice cracked. "My little ones, no need to say more." Caleb turned to his men. "Jonas, you and Wyatt continue with the herd. The rest of you, provisions for 3 days. We're going to find these people." As the cowboys quickly repacked their saddlebags, a peculiar feeling settled over Caleb. Something beyond the simple duty of helping strangers in need. An inexplicable pull toward that distant valley, as if something waited there that would change everything. What he couldn't possibly know was just how right that feeling would prove to be. Meredith O'Sullivan wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her wrist, careful not to smudge the ink in the small leather-bound journal where she'd been tracking their increasingly concerning supplies. 23 families. 41 children. Water for perhaps 2 more days if they rationed carefully. Food becoming a serious concern. At 22, she hadn't expected to bear such responsibility. She'd left her teaching position in Cincinnati with dreams of establishing a school in the Oregon Territory, not trying to prevent panic among increasingly desperate settlers. "Miss O'Sullivan." 8-year-old Emma tugged at the sleeve of Meredith's practical gray cotton dress. "Mrs. Winters says little Thomas isn't drinking again." Meredith tucked a stray copper-colored curl back into her sensible bun. "Tell her I'll be right there." She closed the journal with a sigh, staring across the circled wagons at the arguing men who'd been debating their next move since sunrise. "We push north," insisted Mr. Harrison, a banker whose authority had gone unchallenged until their guide's death. "North is madness," countered Mr. Weber, a farmer whose weather sense had proven reliable. "Those clouds promise more storms. We need to find a settlement." Meredith had no vote in their council, of course. Women rarely did. But she'd been carefully mapping their journey since Illinois, and her suspicion that they'd been traveling in circles for days was becoming certainty. After checking on feverish little Thomas and distributing the day's water ration, she climbed the small rise beyond the wagons. The endless expanse of prairie stretched in every direction, beautiful, terrifying in its vastness. Her honey-brown eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of civilization or landmark. Instead, she saw dust. Riders. Coming fast. Heart pounding, she hurried back to the wagons. "Riders approaching," she called. 7, perhaps 8 men. The arguing stopped instantly. Men reached for rifles, positioning themselves protectively around the wagons. In these territories, strangers could mean rescue or ruin. Meredith stood her ground beside the schoolbooks she'd insisted on bringing despite their weight. If danger approached, she'd face it clear-eyed. She'd sacrificed too much to reach this point, leaving behind her comfortable position, defying her parents' wishes for an advantageous marriage, to cower now. The riders crested the final rise, and Meredith's breath caught. Their leader rode slightly ahead, sitting tall in his saddle with an easy confidence that spoke of a lifetime on horseback. Even at a distance, something about the set of his shoulders and the careful way he approached, hands visible, pace deliberate, eased the knot of fear in her stomach. What she couldn't know was how her copper hair, caught by the afternoon sun, had created a halo effect that momentarily mesmerized the young cowboy leading the rescue party. Nor could she anticipate how their meeting would set in motion events that would challenge everything she thought she wanted from her westward journey. Caleb assessed the wagon train with a practiced eye as they approached. The circled wagons, the thin livestock, the armed men standing guard. These people had been lost longer than they'd admit. He raised his hand to signal his men to slow their approach. "We're from Foster Ranch," he called clearly when they were within earshot. "Heard you folks could use some guidance." An older man with a silver-streaked beard stepped forward. "Harrison's the name." "Who sent you?" "Man called Pearson found us about 15 miles southwest. Said you lost your guide." Relief visibly swept through the gathered settlers. Women emerged from behind the wagons, and children peeked curiously at the newcomers. That's when Caleb saw her, standing straight-backed among the wagons, copper hair gleaming in the sunlight, a leather-bound journal clutched in slender fingers. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, and something electric passed between them, making him momentarily forget why he'd come. Jonas nudged his horse closer. "You all right, boss?" Caleb cleared his throat. "Fine." He dismounted, removing his hat as he approached Harrison. "We can guide you to Cheyenne. It's about 3 days' ride southwest. From there, you can resupply and hire a proper guide for Oregon." 3 days? Harrison frowned. "We were told we were nearly there days ago." "You've been circling the North Platte," Caleb explained gently. "Easy country to get turned around in if you don't know the landmarks." A heated discussion erupted among the settlers. Some wanted proof these cowboys could be trusted, others were desperate for any help. Caleb waited patiently, knowing desperation and pride made for difficult companions. Through the arguing men, he noticed the copper-haired woman moving with purpose among the wagons, speaking reassuringly to worried mothers, organizing children to fill canteens from the cowboys' water barrels. She worked with quiet efficiency, her simple gray dress practical but unable to hide her natural grace. "Who is she?" Caleb asked quietly, nodding toward her. Harrison followed his gaze. "Meredith O'Sullivan, schoolteacher headed to Oregon. Been a godsend with the children during this ordeal. Smart as a whip, that one. Too smart for her own good, sometimes." Caleb's men were already helping distribute supplies and water, explaining to the settlers how they'd guide them to safety. He should have been overseeing these efforts. Instead, he found himself walking toward Meredith, drawn by something he couldn't explain. She looked up as he approached, honey-brown eyes assessing him with an intelligence that made him suddenly conscious of his trail-worn appearance. "Miss O'Sullivan," he said, hat in hand. "Caleb Foster. We'll be guiding your wagons to Cheyenne." "Mr. Foster." Her voice carried the slightest hint of an Eastern accent. "Your arrival is most fortuitous. We've been rationing water since Tuesday. We brought what we could. My men will help reorganize your wagons for travel at first light." She nodded, but her expression remained guarded. "The children are exhausted, Mr. Foster. Some are ill. Can you truly guide us safely?" The question might have offended him from another, but her direct gaze held only genuine concern, not challenge. "This is my country, Miss O'Sullivan," he replied simply. "I've ridden it since I could sit a saddle. We'll get your people to safety." Something shifted in her expression, not quite trust, but the beginning of it. She nodded once, decisively, then hesitated. "May I show you something, Mr. Foster?" she asked, gesturing to her journal. "Of course." She opened it to reveal not just supply tallies, but carefully drawn maps. "I've been tracking our journey. If my calculations are correct, we've been traveling in this pattern." Caleb studied her meticulous work with growing admiration. Most seasoned guides couldn't have mapped their route so precisely. "You've been charting your course all along?" "I find comfort in knowing where I stand," she said, a hint of defensiveness in her tone, "even when lost." Before he could respond, a cry went up from one of the wagons. A child had collapsed from heat exhaustion. Meredith was instantly in motion, and Caleb found himself following, both of them rushing toward the emergency that demanded immediate attention. Neither could have predicted that this moment, this shared instinct to help, would be the first thread in a tapestry weaving their lives together against the vast backdrop of the Wyoming Territory. By sunset, Caleb's men had reorganized the wagon train, distributing supplies and preparing for departure at dawn. Around campfires, cowboys shared stories with wide-eyed children, a welcome distraction from their ordeal. Meredith moved among the families, checking on the ill children, her practical nature evident in every efficient movement. From across the circle of wagons, Caleb found his gaze continually drawn to her. The quiet authority she commanded, the gentle way she spoke to frightened children, the intelligence that shone in her eyes when she referenced her careful maps. Later, as the camp quieted, he found her sitting alone beside a small fire, writing in her journal by the flickering light. "May I join you?" he asked. She looked up, surprised. "Of course, Mr. Foster." He sat across from her, the fire between them. "I wanted to thank you for your maps. They've helped me plan our route." "They're hardly professional," she said, closing the journal self-consciously. "They're remarkably accurate. Did you study cartography?" A small smile touched her lips. "No. Mathematics. I find precision comforting in an unpredictable world." "Yet you left the predictable East for Oregon?" "I'm to establish a school there," she said, her voice taking on a certain warmth. "There's something compelling about building something new, don't you think? Something that will outlast you." Caleb nodded, understanding completely. "That's how I feel about our ranch. My father started with almost nothing. Now Foster land stretches farther than you can see in a day's ride. Your father must be proud to have you following in his footsteps." A shadow crossed Caleb's face. "He expects it. The Foster legacy and all that." He hesitated, then added, "I sometimes wonder if it's truly my path or simply the one laid out before me." Meredith studied him thoughtfully. "Most of us walk paths others have chosen, Mr. Foster. The fortunate ones find joy in the journey anyway." Their conversation continued as the fire burned lower, discovering shared interests in books and ideas despite their different backgrounds. Meredith spoke of her teaching philosophy, education as liberation, while Caleb described the changing West, where railroads and telegraph lines were shrinking the vast distances. When she finally rose to retire, Caleb realized hours had passed like minutes. "We leave at dawn," he said. "The first day will be the hardest." "We'll be ready," she promised. As she walked away, a strange feeling settled over Caleb, a sense that something significant had begun tonight beside this small prairie fire. What that might be, he couldn't yet say. What he didn't know was that Meredith had paused outside her wagon, looking back at his silhouette against the dying flames, experiencing the exact same bewildering certainty. The first day's journey proved brutally difficult. Summer heat beat down mercilessly as the wagon train slowly navigated the rolling terrain. Oxen strained against their yokes, and wagon wheels stuck repeatedly in sandy washes. Caleb rode constantly between the front and rear wagons, encouraging, directing. His men spread throughout the train to assist where needed. By midday, his shirt clung to his back with sweat, and dust coated his skin. During a brief stop to rest the animals, he found Meredith walking among the wagons, distributing water to the children. Despite the heat and difficulty, she maintained her composure, her hair neatly pinned beneath a practical bonnet, her gray dress showing only modest evidence of the difficult journey. "You should rest when we stop," he advised, dismounting beside her. "As should you," she countered, offering him water from her canteen. Their fingers brushed as he accepted it, sending an unexpected current through him. "How are the children holding up?" "Better than yesterday." "Hope is a powerful medicine, Mr. Foster." "Caleb," he said suddenly. "Please call me Caleb." A slight blush colored her cheeks. "Then you must call me Meredith." The moment stretched between them, something unspoken passing in their shared gaze before a commotion near the lead wagon broke the spell. One of Harrison's oxen had collapsed, unable to continue in the heat. Men gathered around the struggling animal, while women hurried children away from the distressing scene. "We'll need to redistribute the weight," Caleb said, assessing the situation quickly. "That wagon's carrying too much." "Mr. Harrison won't be pleased," Meredith warned. "He's transporting equipment for his new bank. Better to lose some equipment than the entire wagon." The ensuing argument with Harrison proved her prediction accurate. The banker refused to abandon any of his cargo, insisting his possessions were too valuable. "Then we leave the wagon and distribute the people," Caleb finally said, his patience wearing thin. Absolutely not. Harrison's face reddened with indignation. Who put you in charge, boy? The word hung in the air. Boy. Deliberately chosen to undermine. Caleb felt the eyes of the entire train upon him. His authority, tenuously established, now wavered. Mr. Harrison, Meredith's clear voice cut through the tension. I've calculated our water consumption. At current rates, we'll exhaust our supply before reaching Cheyenne unless we increase our pace. She opened her journal, showing precisely drawn charts. Mr. Foster's suggestion is our only logical option. Harrison sputtered, but others began nodding. Meredith's reputation for mathematical precision had grown during their ordeal. The lady makes sense, Harrison, said Weber, the farmer. Let's do as Foster suggests. As the group dispersed to reorganize, Caleb caught Meredith's eye. Thank you, he said quietly. It was simply mathematics, she replied, but the small smile that accompanied her words suggested something more. By evening, when they made camp in the shadow of a rocky outcropping, Caleb had gained new respect for the settlers' determination. Despite the grueling day, people worked together efficiently, setting up camp, preparing meals, tending to exhausted children. From atop his horse on a small rise, he watched the camp come to life, satisfaction warming his chest. They'd made good progress despite the setbacks. His gaze found Meredith among the wagons, her copper hair catching the last golden rays of sunlight as she organized an impromptu lesson for several children. Something about her captivated him, her resilience, her intelligence, the way she'd stepped forward to support him today. In just 2 days, she'd become someone he found himself constantly aware of, constantly seeking out. As he turned his horse to check the surrounding countryside before nightfall, he didn't see Harrison watching him watch Meredith, a calculating expression on the banker's face. Nor did he see the storm clouds gathering on the distant horizon, promising complications none of them had anticipated. The second day brought them to a shallow river crossing, normally an easy ford, but recent rains had swollen the water to challenging levels. We'll need to reinforce the wagon beds, Caleb explained to the gathered settlers. The current's strong enough to sweep up anything not properly secured. Men waded into the river to test the depth while women prepared the wagons, waterproofing vulnerable supplies with oilcloth and tying down anything that might wash away. Meredith organized the children, keeping them safely away from the water's edge while teaching them to identify edible plants growing along the riverbank. Her impromptu botany lesson kept them occupied and prevented them from becoming underfoot during the dangerous crossing preparations. Caleb found himself repeatedly glancing her way, admiring her practical approach. She caught his eye once and raised an eyebrow questioningly, making him realize how obvious his attention had become. You seem quite taken with our schoolteacher, Jonas commented as they tested the river bottom for hidden holes. She's capable, Caleb replied noncommittally. And pretty as a sunrise, the older man added with a knowing smile. Caleb couldn't deny it. There was something about Meredith O'Sullivan that drew him like a compass to true north. Her quiet competence, her thoughtful nature, the way her eyes lit up when discussing ideas, all of it fascinated him. She's bound for Oregon, he said finally. I'm needed at Foster Ranch. Jonas merely shrugged. Life has a way of changing directions when you least expect it, boy. The river crossing began at midday, wagons entering the water one by one, men leading oxen through the swift current while cowboys rode alongside to ensure no one strayed into deeper water. Halfway through the operation, catastrophe struck. Harrison's wagon, still overloaded despite the previous day's adjustments, tilted dangerously as it hit a deep section. Children screamed as the wagon lurched sideways, water rushing in as cargo shifted. The children, Meredith cried, rushing toward the water. Caleb was already moving, spurring his horse into the river. 2 small children clung to the side of the listing wagon as water swirled around them. Without hesitation, he guided his horse alongside, reaching down to pluck the first child, a terrified girl of about 6, from danger. Hold tight, he instructed, passing her to a waiting cowboy. The second child, a boy barely 4, lost his grip just as Caleb reached him. The current instantly swept him downstream, his small head barely visible above the churning water. Meredith, standing at the river's edge, didn't hesitate. She hitched up her skirts and plunged into the water, angling downstream to intercept the child's path. "Meredith!" Caleb shouted, already turning his horse to follow. She was a stronger swimmer than he would have guessed, moving purposefully through the water despite her sodden clothing. The boy drifted toward her, arms flailing in panic. Caleb reached them just as she caught the child, but the current threatened to pull them both under. He leaned far from his saddle, extending his arm. "Take my hand." Her eyes met his, determined, not fearful, as she grasped his forearm with surprising strength. With one powerful motion, he pulled both her and the boy from the water's grasp, guiding his horse back toward the shore where anxious settlers waited. As they reached shallow water, Meredith immediately focused on the child, checking his breathing, rubbing his small back as he coughed up river water. Only when she was certain he was unharmed did she seem to notice her own condition, dress plastered to her body, hair hanging in wet ropes down her back. Caleb dismounted, removing his jacket to wrap around her shoulders. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever witnessed," he said, voice rough with emotion. "Mathematics again," she replied, a hint of a smile despite her shivering. The angle of interception was clear. Their eyes held for a long moment before the boy's mother arrived, crying with relief, breaking the connection between them. Later, as the wagons regrouped on the far bank, Caleb found Meredith sitting apart from the others, wearing a borrowed dress while her own dried in the afternoon sun. Her copper hair hung loose around her shoulders, drying in the warm breeze. "The boy will be fine," he said, sitting beside her. "Thanks to you." "And you," she corrected. "We worked well together." "We did." Caleb hesitated, then continued more softly. "I've never met anyone quite like you, Meredith O'Sullivan." Her honey-brown eyes studied him, as if calculating something complex. "Nor I you, Caleb Foster." "Oregon seems very far away suddenly," he said, the words escaping before he could reconsider them. A shadow passed over her face. "My contract is already signed. The community there has been waiting for a teacher for nearly a year." "Of course," Caleb said quickly, embarrassed by his impulsiveness. "I only meant—" "I know what you meant," she interrupted gently. "And in another life, perhaps." She trailed off, looking toward the wagons that would carry her to her future. "We both have paths we've committed to." The evening campfire conversation remained cordial but carefully impersonal, both aware of the dangerous territory they'd nearly ventured into. When Meredith excused herself early, citing exhaustion from the day's excitement, Caleb remained by the fire long after others had retired, watching the flames and contemplating roads not taken. He didn't see Harrison emerge from the shadows to follow Meredith, intercepting her before she reached her wagon. "A word, Miss O'Sullivan," the banker said, his tone falsely pleasant. "I couldn't help but notice your growing friendship with our young guide." Meredith stiffened. "Mr. Foster has been nothing but professional and helpful to all of us." "Of course," Harrison smiled thinly. "Though I wonder if the Oregon committee would approve of their new teacher developing inappropriate attachments during her journey. Small communities have such exacting moral standards." The threat hung in the air between them. "You forget yourself, Mr. Harrison," she replied coldly. "There is nothing inappropriate about expressing gratitude to someone who saved a child's life." "Naturally." His smile never reached his eyes. "I simply thought to remind you of your commitments." "Good evening, Miss O'Sullivan." As Harrison walked away, Meredith stood motionless, her face illuminated by moonlight, the weight of expectations and promises suddenly feeling heavier than ever before. The third day of travel brought the welcome sight of distant smoke on the horizon, Cheyenne. Relief swept through the wagon train as they realized safety was finally within reach. But the journey's end brought complicated emotions for both Caleb and Meredith. They moved through the day's tasks with practiced efficiency, their interactions cordial but careful, both aware that their paths would soon diverge. He to return to his cattle drive, she to continue westward with the settlers. The distance Harrison had attempted to wedge between them succeeded not through his threats, but through the reality of their separate responsibilities. Caleb had duties to Foster Ranch. Meredith had contractual obligations in Oregon. Whatever connection had sparked between them seemed destined to remain unexplored. As they made their final camp before reaching Cheyenne, the settlers organized a celebration to thank their rescuers. Food was shared, music played on a travel-worn fiddle, and for the first time since the Cowboys had found them, Genuine laughter echoed among the wagons. Caleb watched from the periphery as Meredith led the children in a dance, her copper hair gleaming in the firelight, her borrowed dress, a blue calico lent by one of the farmer's wives, swirling around her ankles. She looked happy, carefree in a way he hadn't yet witnessed. "You should ask her to dance," Jonas said, appearing beside him with uncanny timing. "And then what?" Caleb sighed. "We reach Cheyenne tomorrow. She continues to Oregon. I return to the herd. Is that what you want?" The question hung in the air, forcing Caleb to confront feelings he'd been trying to ignore. In just 3 days, Meredith O'Sullivan had awakened something in him, a longing for connection, for partnership with someone who challenged and complimented him. "What I want isn't relevant," he finally answered. "Isn't it?" The older man shook his head. "Your father sent you on this drive to prove you're ready to make decisions for Foster Ranch. Maybe the most important decision isn't about cattle." Before Caleb could respond, commotion erupted near the edge of camp. A rider approached at speed, one of the cowboys Caleb had left with the cattle herd. "Caleb," the man called, dismounting breathlessly. "Trouble with the herd. Storm spooked them last night. We've got cattle scattered across 10 miles of prairie." The news hit like a physical blow. The entire drive's success, and Caleb's chance to prove himself to his father, now hung in the balance. "How many had lost?" he asked, already calculating. "Can't say for certain. At least 100. Maybe more." The gathered settlers fell silent, sensing the gravity of the situation. Caleb's gaze found Meredith among them, her expression concerned. "You need to go," she said, stepping forward. "Immediately." "The wagons," he began, "are less than a day from Cheyenne," she finished. "We can follow your directions from here." Harrison pushed through the crowd. "Now wait just a minute. You promised to guide us all the way to safety." "And I intend to honor that promise," Caleb replied. "Jonas and 2 men will continue with you. The rest of us need to recover the herd." As the settlers debated, Meredith approached Caleb, drawing him slightly apart from the others. "This is your livelihood," she said quietly. "Your responsibility to your father. You must go." Looking into her eyes, Caleb found himself wanting to say things that made no logical sense, asking her to wait, to consider possibilities neither of them had planned for. Instead, he nodded, accepting the reality of their situation. "I wish we'd had more time," he said simply. Something flickered in her expression, regret, perhaps, or something deeper. "As do I." The moment stretched between them, filled with words unspoken. Then Harrison called for Meredith's assistance with organizing the children for the morning's departure, breaking the fragile connection. By dawn, Caleb and 4 cowboys were prepared to ride hard for the scattered herd. The wagons would continue to Cheyenne under Jonas's guidance. The parting was brief, practical, no time for lengthy goodbyes with cattle to recover and a deadline to meet. As Caleb mounted his horse, his eyes sought Meredith one last time. She stood beside her wagon, journal in hand, copper hair neatly pinned beneath her bonnet once more, the brief moment of carefree joy from the previous night's dance replaced by the composed schoolteacher bound for Oregon. Their eyes met across the distance. She raised her hand in a small gesture of farewell. He touched the brim of his hat in response. Then he turned his horse, leading his men away from the wagon train at a gallop, the thunder of hooves drowning out the voice in his head that urged him to stay, to find another way. Neither could have predicted the chain of events their parting would set in motion, events that would test their separate paths and the strength of the connection formed during those 3 critical days on the Wyoming prairie. Cheyenne welcomed the wagon train with the bustle and energy of a growing frontier town. Railroad tracks gleamed in the sun, telegraph wires hummed with distant messages, and the streets teemed with a mix of settlers, cowboys, businessmen, and soldiers from a nearby fort. For many in the wagon train, reaching civilization brought overwhelming relief. Families restocked supplies, repaired wagons, and prepared for the final leg of their journey to Oregon. Children explored the wonders of the town under watchful eyes, excited by simple luxuries like store-bought candy and printed newspapers. For Meredith, however, the arrival brought unexpected complications. As she organized the purchase of books and supplies for her future school, Harrison approached with news. "The Oregon-bound wagons won't depart for at least 2 weeks," he informed her with poorly disguised satisfaction. "Wagon master insists on waiting for additional families arriving from the east." 2 weeks. Meredith frowned. That will put us dangerously close to the first mountain snows. Can't be helped, Harrison replied. Though I've secured comfortable accommodations at the hotel for those of us continuing onward. The committee in Oregon provided ample funds for your journey. The delay meant 2 weeks of close proximity to Harrison, whose thinly veiled warnings about her professional reputation had continued throughout their approach to Cheyenne. The prospect was deeply unwelcome. That evening, as she dined alone in the hotel restaurant, a familiar figure appeared at her table. Miss O'Sullivan. Jonas removed his hat respectfully. Hope I'm not disturbing your meal. Not at all, she said warmly, genuinely pleased to see the weathered cowboy. Please, join me. I thought you'd have departed with the others by now. Heading out at first light, he confirmed, settling into the chair across from her. Wanted to ensure you folks were properly settled first. Thanks to your guidance, we arrived safely. She hesitated, then asked the question that had lingered since their parting. Have you had any news of Mr. Foster and the cattle? Jonas's expression brightened. As a matter of fact, I received a telegram just this afternoon. They've recovered most of the herd. They'll reach the railhead within 3 days. Relief washed over her, surprising in its intensity. That's wonderful news. Indeed it is. Jonas studied her thoughtfully. Caleb was concerned about your wagons reaching town safely. Asked me to confirm your arrival personally. The mention of Caleb's concern sent an unwelcome warmth through her. Please assure him we're all well. The Oregon-bound wagons won't depart for 2 weeks, so there's ample time to prepare for the final journey. 2 weeks, you say? Jonas stroked his beard thoughtfully. Interesting timing. Before she could question his meaning, Harrison appeared at their table, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere. Miss O'Sullivan, I've arranged a meeting with the town's schoolmaster tomorrow morning. I thought you might appreciate discussing educational methods with a fellow professional. His eyes flicked dismissively to Jonas. If you'll excuse us, cowboy, Miss O'Sullivan and I have matters to discuss. Jonas rose, replacing his hat. Of course. Good evening to you both. He turned to Meredith with a respectful nod. A pleasure seeing you again, Miss O'Sullivan. I'll be sure to pass along your news. After he departed, Harrison took the vacated chair uninvited. You would do well to mind your associations, Miss O'Sullivan. Your position in Oregon requires a certain standard of behavior. Mr. Jonas was ensuring our safe arrival, as requested by Mr. Foster. She replied evenly. I fail to see how expressing gratitude constitutes inappropriate behavior. Harrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. I merely have your best interests at heart. The Oregon Committee specifically requested I report on your suitability during our journey. Small towns are particularly concerned with the moral character of those entrusted with educating their children. The implied threat hung between them. As a single woman in a profession dependent on community approval, Meredith was acutely aware of her vulnerable position. Her teaching position represented financial independence and purpose, achievements too hard-won to risk. If you'll excuse me, she said, rising from the table, I find I've lost my appetite. In her room, Meredith opened her journal, seeking comfort in the precise columns of figures and carefully drawn maps. But instead of mathematical certainty, she found herself sketching a familiar face, strong jaw, kind eyes, the hint of a smile that transformed his features from merely handsome to something that made her heart race. She closed the journal abruptly, troubled by the direction of her thoughts. Caleb Foster represented a detour she couldn't afford to take, no matter how tempting. She had promises to keep, children waiting for education in Oregon, a path carefully planned. Why, then, did that path suddenly feel less like opportunity and more like obligation? 3 days later, the cattle drive arrived at the Cheyenne railhead. Dust-covered cowboys herded bellowing steers through the eastern edge of town toward the stockyards, their shouts and whistles creating a familiar symphony of organized chaos. Caleb rode at the front, directing operations with the quiet authority that had become his trademark. Though they'd recovered most of the scattered herd, the delay meant pushing the animals harder than he'd have preferred, and all of them, men and beasts alike, were exhausted. As the last steer was corralled in the stockyards, Caleb dismounted, muscles aching from days of hard riding. The cattle would be loaded onto rail cars tomorrow, bound for Chicago slaughterhouses. The drive was complete, successful despite the setbacks. Yet victory felt hollow. Throughout the frantic days of tracking and recovering scattered cattle, His thoughts had repeatedly drifted to Meredith, her copper hair catching sunlight, her decisive actions during the river rescue, the connection he'd felt growing between them. Foster, a cattle buyer approached, hand extended. Heard you had some trouble. Glad to see you made it with most of the herd intact. Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Caleb shook the man's hand. We lost 38 head, but the rest are here and healthy. Business consumed the remainder of the day, negotiating prices, arranging payment, settling accounts with the railroad. By evening, Caleb had secured favorable terms that would please his father, completing the mission he'd been sent to accomplish. Celebration at the Silver Dollar tonight, announced Wyatt, one of the younger cowboys. First round's on the boss. The men cheered, eager to enjoy town pleasures after weeks on the trail. Caleb nodded his agreement, though his own enthusiasm for saloon revelry had diminished considerably. You coming, boss? Wyatt asked as Caleb turned toward the hotel instead of the saloon. Later, Caleb promised. Need to clean up first. In truth, he needed solitude to sort through his conflicted thoughts. The drive was finished. By all rights, he should be heading home to Foster Ranch tomorrow, reporting their success to his father, stepping further into his role as heir to the family empire. Instead, he found himself lingering in the hotel's washroom, scrubbing trail dust from his skin with unusual thoroughness, trimming his light stubble to smoothness, and donning fresh clothes from his saddlebags. The man who emerged looked more like a respectable businessman than a trail-worn cowboy. Only the lingering tan lines from his hat and the calluses on his hands betrayed his true occupation. In the hotel lobby, he hesitated, uncertain of his next move. The logical course was joining his men at the saloon, celebrating their success, preparing for the journey home. Instead, he approached the front desk. Excuse me, could you tell me if a Miss Meredith O'Sullivan is staying here? The clerk consulted his register. Yes, sir. Room 214. Shall I send word you're asking after her? No, thank you. Caleb retreated, suddenly unsure of his purpose. What exactly did he intend to say if he found her? That he couldn't stop thinking about her? That meeting her had somehow altered his perception of his own future? Before he could resolve this internal debate, a familiar voice reached him from across the lobby. Mr. Foster. He turned to find Meredith descending the stairs, wearing a simple blue dress that complemented her copper hair, which was arranged more elegantly than he'd seen during their journey. The sight of her stopped his breath momentarily. Miss O'Sullivan, he managed, removing his hat. I was just, he faltered, unable to explain his presence without revealing more than he'd intended. I'm glad to see you safely arrived, she said, rescuing him from his awkwardness. Jonas mentioned you'd recovered most of the herd. We did. He hesitated, then added, I wanted to ensure your wagon train reached town without further difficulties. Thanks to your guidance, we arrived without incident. Her smile seemed genuinely pleased to see him, though something guarded remained in her eyes. An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken thoughts. I was just going to dinner, she finally said. Would you care to join me? That is, if you don't have other arrangements. I'd be honored, he replied, offering his arm without thinking. She hesitated briefly before accepting it, her hand light on his forearm. The simple contact sent warmth spreading through him, confirming what he'd been trying to deny since their parting. His feelings for Meredith O'Sullivan had grown far beyond casual admiration. What he couldn't see was the internal struggle behind her composed expression, the battle between propriety and desire, between the path she'd planned and the unexpected possibility standing before her. As they entered the restaurant together, neither noticed Harrison watching from the shadows of the hotel bar, his expression darkening at this unexpected development. Dinner conversation flowed easily between them, as if the days apart had never happened. They shared stories of their separate journeys, Caleb describing the cattle recovery, Meredith relating her impressions of Cheyenne and her preparations for continuing to Oregon. 2 weeks seems a significant delay, Caleb observed when she mentioned the wait for additional Oregon-bound families. It is concerning, she admitted. Mountain passes become treacherous with early snow. Why not wait until spring? Winter in Cheyenne would be far safer than risking mountain travel this late in the season. Meredith's expression grew troubled. The community in Oregon has already waited nearly a year for a teacher. Children have gone without proper education. I promised to arrive before winter. Surely they would understand delays for safety's sake. Perhaps. She hesitated, then added more quietly, but there are expectations regarding my punctuality and reliability. Mr. Harrison has been quite clear about the committee's standards. Something in her tone alerted Caleb. Has Harrison been pressuring you? Not precisely. She rearranged her silverware with mathematical precision. He simply reminds me frequently of my professional obligations and the importance of maintaining an impeccable reputation. Caleb's jaw tightened. That sounds like pressure to me. It's the reality of being a female teacher, she said with resigned practicality. My position depends on community approval. One hint of impropriety could end my career. And dining with a cowboy might constitute impropriety? He asked, attempting to keep his tone light despite the sting. Her eyes met his directly. According to some, yes. Particularly when that cowboy looks at me the way you do. The honesty of her statement startled him into his own candor. And how is that? As if I'm a mathematical problem you're trying to solve, she said softly. One with a solution just beyond your grasp. The description was so unexpected and so accurate that Caleb laughed despite himself. Is that how you see it too? A problem without a solution? I see two people with established paths heading in opposite directions, she replied carefully. Mathematics suggests we're parallel lines, destined never to intersect. Unless we change the equation, he suggested, leaning forward slightly. Before she could respond, a waiter arrived with coffee, breaking the moment. When he departed, Meredith steered the conversation towards safer topics. Books they'd both read, childhood memories, hopes for the future carefully framed within their separate worlds. Yet throughout, an undercurrent of possibility hummed between them, growing stronger despite their mutual attempts to maintain proper distance. As they left the restaurant, Caleb suggested a walk through town before returning to the hotel. The evening was mild, stars appearing in the darkening sky above the busy frontier town. I've been thinking about what you said, he began as they strolled along the boardwalk. About parallel lines never intersecting. It's a mathematical certainty, she replied. In Euclidean geometry, perhaps. But I've been reading about new mathematical theories that suggest parallel lines might eventually meet if the space they exist in curves. Meredith looked at him with surprise. You've studied non-Euclidean geometry? Not formally, he admitted. But I read whatever I can get my hands on. Being a rancher doesn't mean surrendering intellectual curiosity. I never suggested it did, she said softly. Though I find myself constantly surprised by you, Caleb Foster. The use of his given name, spoken with such warmth, emboldened him. Would you consider a proposition, Meredith? She tensed slightly. What sort of proposition? Stay in Wyoming. The words rushed out before he could reconsider them. Not permanently, just until spring. Foster Ranch needs a teacher for the children of our workers. It's a position we've been trying to fill for months. Meredith stopped walking, clearly stunned by the suggestion. But my contract in Oregon could be deferred until safer travel is possible, he finished. You'd still fulfill your commitment, just with a slight delay. And in the meantime, children who currently have no educational opportunities would benefit from your skills. She shook her head slowly. It's not that simple. The Oregon Committee has specific expectations. Mr. Harrison has no authority over your decisions, Caleb interrupted firmly. Your contract is with the Oregon community, not with him. Even so, I've given my word. To teach children who need education, he pointed out. There are children at Foster Ranch who need you just as much. The conflict was evident in her expression, duty warring with possibility, established plans against unexpected opportunity. There's another factor to consider, Caleb said more softly. One we've both been avoiding discussing. Her honey brown eyes met his, understanding perfectly what he meant. That would be unwise to factor into professional decisions. Perhaps, he acknowledged. But ignoring it doesn't make it less real. Before she could respond, a sharp voice cut through the evening air. Miss O'Sullivan. Harrison approached rapidly, disapproval etched into every line of his face. I've been looking everywhere for you. We have an early meeting tomorrow with the wagon master. His gaze shifted coldly to Caleb. Mr. Foster, I wasn't aware you had returned to town. This afternoon, Caleb replied evenly, refusing to be intimidated by the older man's obvious attempt to separate them. How fortunate you found time to socialize before returning to your ranch, Harrison said, the words dripping with insinuation. Miss O'Sullivan, we really must discuss tomorrow's arrangements. Meredith straightened, composing her features into a neutral expression. Of course, Mr. Harrison. Mr. Foster was kind enough to join me for dinner, but we've concluded our conversation. The dismissal stung, though Caleb understood her position. Thank you for your company, Miss O'Sullivan, he said formally. My offer remains open should you wish to consider it further. Harrison's eyes narrowed at this cryptic statement, but Meredith merely nodded, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. Good evening, Mr. Foster. As Harrison led her away, Caleb remained on the boardwalk, watching her copper hair catch the light from shop windows. He'd said his piece, offered an alternative. Now the decision was hers to make. What he couldn't know was how her heart raced with possibilities she'd never allowed herself to consider. Possibilities that would keep her awake long into the night, weighing duty against desire, security against adventure, planned paths against unexpected detours. The following morning found Caleb at the telegraph office, sending a message to his father about the successful completion of the cattle drive and expected payment from the Chicago buyers. He deliberately omitted any mention of the proposition he'd offered Meredith, uncertain how to explain feelings he barely understood himself. As he exited the office, Jonas approached, looking troubled. Thought you should know, the older man said without preamble. There's talk around town that Harrison's been spreading rumors about Miss O'Sullivan. Caleb tensed. What kind of rumors? The kind designed to damage a young woman's reputation, suggesting she's been behaving improperly with certain cowboys during the journey. Jonas's weathered face reflected his disgust. Nothing specific enough to challenge directly, but enough to raise eyebrows. That snake, Caleb muttered, anger rising. Why would he do this? Control, I'd wager. Man like that enjoys power over others, especially those he can't otherwise dominate. Jonas shrugged. Or maybe he has designs on her himself. He's been mighty protective of her company since they arrived. The thought turned Caleb's stomach. Where is she now? Saw her at the general store earlier, purchasing supplies for the Oregon journey. Harrison was hovering nearby, as usual. I need to warn her, Caleb said, already moving in that direction. Jonas caught his arm. Careful, son. Confronting Harrison directly might just make things worse for her. These situations require delicate handling. What would you suggest? Find her alone. Let her know what's happening so she can make informed decisions. Jonas released his arm. And remember, whatever she decides, it must be her choice, not yours. The wisdom in the older man's advice was undeniable. Caleb nodded his agreement and headed toward the general store, careful to appear casual in his movements. He found Meredith examining textbooks, Harrison nowhere in sight, a rare moment of privacy he couldn't waste. Good morning, he said quietly, approaching her. She looked up, surprise, and something warmer flickering in her eyes before she composed her features. Mr. Foster, I didn't expect to see you still in town. We leave tomorrow, he replied. I needed to speak with you privately before I go. Her expression grew wary. I'm not sure that's wise. It's necessary. He glanced around to ensure their privacy. Harrison has been spreading rumors about you, suggesting impropriety during our journey. Color drained from her face. That's absurd. I've been nothing but professional throughout. You and I know that. But rumors don't require truth to cause damage. Caleb moved closer, lowering his voice further. I believe he's trying to maintain control over you, make you dependent on his approval to preserve your reputation. Meredith closed the book she'd been examining, her knuckles white with tension. What evidence do you have of these rumors? Jonas has heard them directly from several townspeople. Nothing specific, just insinuations about your character and behavior with the cowboys who rescued your wagon train. She inhaled sharply. If such rumors reach Oregon. Exactly. Caleb hesitated, then added, my offer still stands. Foster Ranch is far from Harrison's influence. By spring, these rumors will have faded, and you can continue to Oregon with your reputation intact. Conflict played across her features. It would mean breaking my immediate commitment. It would mean protecting your long-term ability to teach, he countered gently. What good is arriving in Oregon if these rumors prevent you from doing the work you love? Before she could respond, a store clerk approached. Miss O'Sullivan, your order is ready for collection. Thank you. She replied automatically, her mind clearly elsewhere. When they were alone again, she met Caleb's gaze directly. I need time to consider what you've told me. to determine the right course of action. Of course, he reached into his pocket, withdrawing a folded paper. This contains directions to Foster Ranch and a letter authorizing your employment should you decide to accept. We depart tomorrow at dawn. She accepted the paper, tucking it carefully into her reticule. Thank you for the warning, regardless of what I decide. Meredith, he said softly, using her given name despite the public setting. Whatever you choose, please know that my interest in you extends far beyond offering employment. But I would never pressure you to act against your own judgment. A faint blush colored her cheeks. Your honesty is appreciated, as is your respect for my decision. The store's bell jangled as new customers entered, ending their moment of privacy. With a respectful nod, Caleb departed, hoping he'd done enough to help without overwhelming her with his own desires. What remained unspoken between them, the growing attraction, the sense of connection that defied rational explanation, would have to wait for another time, another place. If such an opportunity ever came. That evening, as Meredith sat alone in her hotel room, a soft knock at her door interrupted her troubled thoughts. She opened it cautiously to find a young girl, perhaps 12 years old, standing in the hallway. Miss O'Sullivan? The girl asked timidly. Mr. Harrison asked me to deliver this note to you. Meredith accepted the folded paper with a word of thanks and a small coin for the messenger. Closing the door, she broke the seal and read the brief message. Miss O'Sullivan, urgent news from Oregon requires immediate discussion. Please join me in the hotel dining room at 8 o'clock this evening. J. Harrison. The vague summons heightened her already considerable unease. After Caleb's warning about rumors, she viewed Harrison's behavior in a new light, his constant supervision, his subtle threats about her reputation, his determination to isolate her from others. Was it possible Caleb was right? Was Harrison deliberately undermining her to maintain control? The mathematical part of her mind, the part that sought patterns and connections, began assembling evidence. Harrison's increased attention after he observed her growing friendship with Caleb. His insistence on accompanying her everywhere in town. His frequent reminders of her dependence on his good reports to the Oregon Committee. The pattern suggested manipulation, not protection. She glanced at her half-packed trunk, then at her journal lying open on the bed. Inside was the folded paper Caleb had given her, directions to Foster Ranch and his written offer of employment. An alternative path, a choice she never expected to have. Teaching had always been her calling, her means of independence in a world where women had few options for self-sufficiency. The Oregon position represented security, respectability, fulfillment of her professional ambitions. Yet Foster Ranch offered those same opportunities, with one significant addition: the chance to explore her feelings for a man who looked at her as an equal, who valued both her intelligence and her courage. Meredith had always believed in making rational decisions, in following carefully considered plans. But now, facing Harrison's manipulation and Caleb's honest alternative, the rational choice and the emotional one aligned in unexpected harmony. With sudden clarity, she understood what she must do. She quickly penned 2 letters, one to the Oregon Committee explaining her delayed arrival due to safety concerns, and another declining Harrison's dinner invitation with a carefully worded explanation of her change in plans. Then she began repacking her trunk with methodical efficiency, preparing for a journey she hadn't anticipated but now embraced with growing certainty. By morning, Harrison would discover she had departed. By evening, she would either reach Foster Ranch or face the consequences of the most impulsive decision of her orderly life. Either way, for the first time since beginning her westward journey, Meredith felt truly in control of her own destiny. Dawn painted the eastern sky with gold and crimson as Caleb supervised the loading of supplies for the journey back to Foster Ranch. His cowboys worked efficiently, eager to return home after the successful completion of their mission. He'd spent a restless night, thoughts circling constantly back to Meredith, her safety, her decision, the possibility he might never see her again after today. Though he'd meant every word of his offer, he harbored few illusions about her accepting it. She was devoted to her teaching commitment, principled in fulfilling her obligations. Admirable qualities, even when they led her away from him. Ready to ride, boss? Wyatt called, securing the last pack horse. Ready, Caleb confirmed, swinging into his saddle with practiced ease. As the small company prepared to depart, hoofbeats approached from the direction of town. Caleb turned, expecting a last-minute message from the cattle buyer. Instead, he saw a familiar figure on horseback, copper hair gleaming in the early morning light, a small trunk secured behind her saddle. Meredith pulled her horse alongside his, her expression a mixture of determination and something softer. "I understand Foster Ranch is in need of a teacher," she said without preamble. Joy surged through him, but caution tempered his response. "Are you certain? This is a significant change in your plans. I've written to the Oregon committee explaining my decision to delay until spring for safety reasons. I've also made my position clear to Mr. Harrison regarding his supervisory methods. And you're comfortable with this decision?" Her honey-brown eyes met his directly. "I've calculated the variables carefully, Mr. Foster. The opportunity to teach children who currently lack educational resources outweighs the risks of mountain travel as winter approaches. It's the logical choice." "Purely logical?" he asked, unable to keep a hint of disappointment from his voice. A smile touched her lips. "Mathematics suggests that when two paths might intersect, one should investigate the potential outcome rather than assuming parallelism." Relief and happiness washed through him. "That sounds like solid mathematical reasoning to me, Miss O'Sullivan. I thought you might approve." Her smile widened, revealing the warmth she'd kept carefully guarded until now. With a nod to his men, Caleb turned his horse westward, Meredith riding beside him as they began the journey to Foster Ranch, and toward a future neither had anticipated when a lost wagon train and a rescue party crossed paths on the Wyoming prairie. Behind them, the rising sun illuminated the growing town of Cheyenne, where Harrison would soon discover that his carefully constructed control had crumbled in the face of something more powerful. The unexpected connection between two people brave enough to recalculate their separate paths into one shared journey. Foster Ranch spread across the rolling landscape like a small kingdom, acres of grassland dotted with cattle, sturdy outbuildings, and a main house built of local stone and timber that spoke of permanence and prosperity. As they crested the final rise after 2 days of travel, Caleb felt both pride in his heritage and anxiety about introducing Meredith to his world. "It's beautiful," she said, taking in the sweeping vista. "How many people live here?" "About 30 families," he replied. "Ranch hands and their wives and children. Most have been with us for years. And they have no school. A makeshift one, run by Mrs. Donnelly when she can spare time from her own 5 children. She does her best, but she's not a trained teacher." As they approached, workers called greetings, curious eyes taking in the unexpected addition to their returning party. Word spread quickly, and by the time they reached the main house, a small crowd had gathered. An imposing figure emerged from the house. Calvin Foster, Caleb's father, a broad-shouldered man with the same green eyes as his son, but with silver threading through his dark hair. His expression registered surprise at the sight of Meredith. "Successful drive, I take it?" he called as they dismounted. "Yes, sir," Caleb replied. Full count -38 had lost in the storm. Patterson paid the agreed price. "Good." Calvin's gaze shifted to Meredith. "And who might this be?" Caleb made the introductions formally. "Father, this is Miss Meredith O'Sullivan, a qualified teacher who has agreed to instruct our ranch children through the winter. Miss O'Sullivan, my father, Calvin Foster." Calvin assessed her with undisguised curiosity. "A teacher? That's unexpected but welcome news. Though I don't recall discussing hiring one before your departure. It was an opportunity that arose during our journey," Caleb explained carefully. "Miss O'Sullivan was traveling to Oregon when we encountered her wagon train in difficulty. When I mentioned our need for a teacher, she graciously agreed to delay her Oregon plans until spring." Understanding dawned in Calvin's expression as he connected the wagon rescue Caleb had telegraphed about with the appearance of this young woman. "I see," he said, his tone suggesting he saw perhaps more than Caleb had explained. "Well, Miss O'Sullivan, you are most welcome at Foster Ranch. We've needed proper education for our children for some time." "Thank you, Mr. Foster," Meredith replied. "I look forward to establishing a structured educational environment for them." "Hannah will show you to the schoolhouse and your accommodations," Calvin said, gesturing to the housekeeper who had appeared in the doorway. "I'm sure you'll want to rest after your journey before meeting the children." As Meredith followed Hannah, Calvin turned to his son with raised eyebrows. A qualified teacher just happened to delay her contracted position to come teach at our remote ranch. Caleb met his father's knowing gaze directly. She had compelling reasons to reconsider her immediate travel to Oregon. I imagine at least one of those reasons is standing right in front of me, Calvin observed dryly. Her decision was her own, Caleb insisted, based on practical considerations of safety and professional opportunity. Of course, Calvin clapped his son on the shoulder. Come inside and tell me about the cattle drive. And perhaps, if you're inclined, the full story of this fortuitous rescue mission that brought a beautiful, educated young woman to our doorstep. Inside the main house, over coffee, Caleb recounted the entire story, finding the lost wagon train, guiding them to safety, the connection that had developed between himself and Meredith, and Harrison's attempts to control her through manipulation. Calvin listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. When Caleb finished, he nodded slowly. You acted honorably throughout, he said finally, both in rescuing these people and in offering Miss O'Sullivan an alternative that protected her reputation and professional standing. Relief washed through Caleb at his father's approval. I didn't expect her to accept. But you hoped she would, Calvin observed shrewdly. Yes, Caleb admitted, though I made it clear her decision must be based on what she truly wanted, not on any feelings she might have for me. Wise approach. Calvin leaned back in his chair. And now that she's here, what are your intentions? The direct question caught Caleb off guard. To give her time. To let her establish herself as the ranch's teacher without pressure or expectations beyond her professional duties. Admirable restraint, his father commented with a hint of amusement. Though I suspect Miss O'Sullivan didn't delay her Oregon plans merely for professional advancement. Perhaps not, Caleb acknowledged. But whatever develops between us should grow naturally, without rushing or presumption. Calvin studied his son with newfound respect. You've matured, Caleb. Leading this drive, making decisions independently. You've proven yourself capable of handling responsibility, including the responsibility of respecting a young woman's autonomy while still pursuing what you want. The praise, so rarely offered, warmed Caleb deeply. Thank you, Father. Don't thank me yet, Calvin warned with a smile. Running a ranch is far easier than navigating matters of the heart, particularly with a woman as intelligent and independent as your Miss O'Sullivan appears to be. She's not my Miss O'Sullivan, Caleb protested automatically. Not yet, his father agreed with a knowing smile. But I suspect that's merely a matter of time and patience, qualities you've demonstrated admirably during this cattle drive. As Caleb left to oversee the unpacking of supplies, he found himself hoping his father's assessment would prove accurate. For now, though, having Meredith at Foster Ranch, safe, independent, and free from Harrison's manipulation, was enough. The future would unfold as it should, one carefully considered step at a time. The schoolhouse at Foster Ranch was a modest structure that had previously served as a storage building. Within days of her arrival, Meredith had transformed it into a proper classroom, hanging maps on walls, arranging benches and tables salvaged from various outbuildings, and establishing a small library from her own books and those donated by the Foster family. Word spread quickly about the new teacher, and on her first official day, 23 children ranging from 5 to 16 years old arrived eagerly for instruction. Many had received only sporadic education before, some could barely read. Caleb watched from a distance as Meredith organized them by ability rather than age, creating a system where older students helped younger ones while she moved between groups providing specialized instruction. Her natural teaching gifts were immediately apparent: patience with struggling learners, enthusiasm that sparked curiosity, and firm discipline when needed. In the weeks that followed, Caleb maintained respectful distance, allowing Meredith to establish herself independently within the ranch community. They saw each other regularly at meals in the main house, where Calvin had insisted she dine as a valued professional rather than with the ranch hands' families. These encounters remained cordial, their conversation focusing on the children's progress and ranch activities. Yet beneath this propriety, their connection continued to deepen. Caleb found reasons to ride past the schoolhouse during lessons, the sound of Meredith's clear voice leading recitations bringing an involuntary smile to his face. Meredith, for her part, often lingered after dinner to discuss books from the Foster library, their literary conversations gradually expanding to include personal hopes and philosophies. One crisp October evening, Caleb found Meredith on the main house porch, wrapped in a shawl against the autumn chill, gazing at the stars scattered across the vast Wyoming sky. "May I join you?" he asked, maintaining the careful formality they'd established in public. "Please do." She smiled warmly, making space on the bench beside her. He settled next to her, close enough to sense her warmth without touching. "The children can't stop talking about today's science lesson. Apparently, you created quite a spectacle with your demonstration of planetary orbits." "They needed to understand why seasons change," she explained, eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Books alone couldn't convey the concept properly. So I heard. Having Timmy Jensen spin in circles while holding a lantern was quite innovative." Her laugh echoed in the quiet evening. He was very dedicated to his role as the sun. Perhaps too dedicated. He nearly set Peter's hair on fire during the demonstration of summer solstice. Their shared laughter felt natural, comfortable, as did the silence that followed. Above them, the Milky Way arched across the sky in breathtaking clarity. "I never saw stars like this in Cincinnati," Meredith said softly. The city lights obscured all but the brightest. "One benefit of ranch isolation," Caleb replied. "Though I imagine you miss city conveniences." "Some," she acknowledged. "Bookshops, concert halls, ice cream parlors." "No ice cream, but we do have music," he offered. "The harvest dance is next week. Most of the county attends." She turned toward him, curiosity in her expression. "Is that an invitation, Mr. Foster?" "It is, Miss O'Sullivan." He met her gaze directly. "Though I should warn you that accepting might cause speculation among the ranch families. About whether their teacher and the ranch owner's son have developed feelings beyond professional courtesy." Her expression grew thoughtful. "And have they developed such feelings?" The directness of her question, so characteristic of her approach to everything, both surprised and delighted him. Speaking for the ranch owner's son, he said carefully, "Those feelings have existed since watching a copper-haired teacher rescue a child from a river without hesitation." Color rose in her cheeks, visible even in the dim porch light. "The teacher," she replied softly, "has been conducting a thorough mathematical analysis of her own feelings. The evidence suggests they align with those you've described." Joy surged through him, but he tempered his response, mindful of her independent nature. "Does this mathematical analysis include potential complications? The Oregon position waiting in spring, for instance?" "It does." She turned fully toward him, her expression serious. "I've written to the Oregon committee explaining that while I still intend to honor my contract, my experiences at Foster Ranch have revealed educational needs just as pressing here." Meaning I've proposed establishing a permanent school at Foster Ranch, with a qualified replacement teacher to continue the work when I fulfill my Oregon obligation. The implication that she was already planning beyond her temporary stay both encouraged and confused him. "That's a generous solution, but it still leads to your departure in spring. Unless," she said carefully, "circumstances change in ways that would justify renegotiating my Oregon contract." Understanding dawned slowly. "What circumstances might those be, Miss O'Sullivan?" "I believe that's partially dependent on your intentions, Mr. Foster." The moment stretched between them, fraught with possibility. Caleb chose his next words with deliberate care. "My intentions are honorable, but not presumptuous. I've grown to admire and care for you deeply, Meredith. I would like to court you properly, with respect for your independence and professional commitments. Where that might lead us, I cannot predict with mathematical certainty, but I would very much like to discover the answer together." Her smile and response held both warmth and relief. "I find that approach satisfactorily logical, Caleb, and personally appealing." "Then you'll accompany me to the harvest dance?" he asked, unable to keep the happiness from his voice. "I will." Her eyes sparkled with mischief. "Though I should warn you, I've been teaching the children traditional dances during recreation periods. They'll be watching their teacher quite carefully to ensure I execute the steps properly." "I'll do my best not to embarrass you," he promised, reaching tentatively for her hand. She met him halfway, her fingers twining with his in the space between them, a small gesture heavy with meaning, a first step on a path they would now explore together. Neither spoke for some time, content to sit beneath the stars with their joined hands forming a bridge between their once separate worlds. The future remained unwritten, full of possibilities and potential challenges. But in this moment, on a ranch porch in Wyoming Territory, a young cowboy and a mathematics-loving teacher had found an unexpected equation with a solution that satisfied them both. The harvest dance transformed the Foster Ranch barn into a wonderland of autumn splendor. Golden hay bales arranged around the perimeter, lanterns hanging from rafters, tables laden with seasonal bounty prepared by every family on the ranch and neighboring properties. A small band of local musicians tuned fiddles and guitars on a makeshift stage, while children darted excitedly between adults in their Sunday best. Caleb waited nervously on the main house porch, dressed in his finest clothes, a dark suit rarely worn, boots polished to a mirror shine. When the door opened and Meredith appeared, his breath caught audibly. She wore a dress of deep green velvet, her copper hair arranged in an elegant style that framed her face with soft curls. The simplicity of her appearance, unadorned except for a small pearl pendant at her throat, only enhanced her natural beauty. "You look beautiful," he said, offering his arm. "Thank you." Her smile held a hint of shyness unusual for her typically composed demeanor. "The dress was a gift from your father," he insisted, a teacher. The information surprised and pleased Caleb. His father's acceptance of Meredith, treating her not as a temporary employee, but as someone worthy of such personal consideration, spoke volumes about Calvin Foster's assessment of her potential place in their lives. As they walked toward the barn, ranch families nodded greetings, children waved excitedly to their teacher, and Caleb was acutely aware of curious glances following their progress. Their appearance together at this public event represented a statement neither could deny. This was officially courtship, acknowledged before the entire community. Inside the barn, Calvin Foster greeted them warmly. "Miss O'Sullivan, you bring grace to our humble celebration," he said, bowing slightly over her hand. "I trust my son will ensure you enjoy the evening thoroughly." "I'm certain he will, Mr. Foster," she replied, "though I hope you'll reserve at least one dance for yourself. I've heard you're quite accomplished." Calvin laughed, genuinely delighted by her forthright manner. "I would be honored, my dear, though these old knees aren't what they once were." The band struck up a lively tune, and Caleb led Meredith onto the dance floor. Their movements together proved surprisingly natural, his inherent physical grace complementing her precise, mathematical approach to the dance steps. "You dance very well for a cowboy," she observed, eyes bright with pleasure. "My mother insisted on lessons," he admitted. "Said no son of hers would stumble around a dance floor like a newborn calf. She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. A shadow of old grief crossed his face. "She passed when I was 14. Influenza." Meredith squeezed his hand gently. "I'm sorry. It must have been difficult for you and your father." "It was. For a long time, we barely spoke, both too locked in our own grief to help each other." The music shifted to a slower waltz, allowing more intimate conversation as they continued dancing. Eventually, we found our way back to each other through the ranch. Working together gave us purpose when nothing else made sense. "That explains the bond between you," she said thoughtfully. "The respect beneath the occasional tension. You've noticed that, have you?" He smiled wryly. "I observe patterns, remember? Your father tests you because he respects you, and you push back because you want to earn that respect on your own terms." Her insight, so accurate and perceptive, reminded Caleb why he'd been drawn to her from the beginning. Meredith saw beneath surfaces to the underlying structures, understanding complexities others missed. "You would have made an excellent mathematician," he said. "Who says I'm not?" She raised an eyebrow playfully. "Teaching requires applied mathematics daily, calculating individual progress rates, adjusting instructional sequences, determining optimal classroom arrangements." "I stand corrected," he laughed. "Though I'm selfishly glad you chose teaching over pure mathematics. Otherwise, our paths might never have crossed." "An interesting hypothesis," she mused. "Though I'm increasingly convinced that some intersections are predetermined by forces beyond mathematical calculation." "Miss O'Sullivan," he teased, "are you suggesting fate rather than science? Perhaps a formula we simply haven't discovered yet," she replied with mock seriousness. "One that explains why a cowboy and a teacher from entirely different worlds would find themselves dancing together in a Wyoming barn." If such a formula exists, he said more softly, I'm profoundly grateful for it. The evening progressed through dances, conversations with neighbors, and moments of quiet connection. Caleb introduced Meredith to everyone as our teacher, but the proprietary warmth in his voice communicated deeper meaning that no one could miss. Later, as they walked back to the main house under a canopy of stars, Meredith's hand rested comfortably in the crook of his arm. The night air carried the first hint of winter's approach, a crispness that promised snow in the coming weeks. Thank you for a wonderful evening, she said as they reached the porch. I haven't danced like that since college socials. Thank you for accompanying me, he replied. Every man there envied me tonight. Hardly that, she demurred, though pleasure colored her cheeks. They paused at the door, the moment laden with expectation. Caleb hesitated, wanting to kiss her, but mindful of propriety and her position as the ranch's teacher. Meredith solved his dilemma with characteristic directness. Rising slightly on her toes, she pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek, brief but unmistakably intentional. Good night, Caleb, she said softly. Good night, Meredith. As he walked to his own quarters, Caleb felt a certainty settling deep within him, a recognition that his life had fundamentally changed since the day their wagon train had appeared on the horizon. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever decisions awaited regarding Oregon commitments and ranch responsibilities, the connection between them had become something neither could deny or retreat from. Their separate paths had not merely intersected. They had begun to merge into a shared journey whose destination remained unclear, but whose direction felt unquestionably right. Winter descended on Foster Ranch with breathtaking swiftness. November brought the first heavy snowfall, transforming the landscape into a pristine white expanse that glittered beneath clear blue skies. Ranch activities shifted to winter patterns: livestock care, equipment repair, preservation of autumn's harvest. In the schoolhouse, Meredith adjusted her teaching to accommodate the season. Morning sessions focused on academic subjects, while afternoons often featured practical skills, the girls learning needlework and household management from ranch wives, the boys receiving instruction in carpentry and animal husbandry from experienced hands. Caleb's courtship continued with quiet consistency, escorting Meredith to Sunday services, evening walks when weather permitted, shared meals with his father in the main house. Their relationship deepened through conversation and growing understanding of each other's dreams and values. By December, the entire ranch community had accepted them as a couple, though they maintained appropriate decorum given Meredith's position. Children occasionally giggled when Caleb visited the schoolhouse, but Meredith's firm professionalism quickly refocused their attention. One particularly bitter evening, with snow falling heavily outside, Calvin invited Meredith to join him and Caleb in the main house library after dinner. A fire crackled in the hearth as Calvin poured brandy for himself and Caleb, offering Meredith her preference of hot chocolate. I've been corresponding with the school board in Cheyenne, Calvin announced without preamble, discussing the possibility of establishing Foster Ranch School as an officially recognized educational institution. Meredith straightened, surprise evident in her expression. Official recognition would require meeting territorial standards. Proper facilities, approved textbooks, qualified instruction. All things we could provide, Calvin replied, with appropriate investment and the right leadership. His gaze settled meaningfully on her. I've mentioned your qualifications in my letters. They were quite impressed. Understanding dawned in her eyes. You're proposing a permanent school, not just for ranch children, but perhaps for neighboring properties as well. Precisely. Calvin sipped his brandy thoughtfully. Education is spreading across the territory, but slowly. Many children still lack access to proper schooling. Foster Ranch could change that for this region. Caleb watched Meredith carefully, seeing the professional excitement this prospect generated in her, but also the conflict it created regarding her Oregon commitment. It's a wonderful vision, she said finally, and I'm honored by your confidence in my abilities. But my contract might be negotiable, Calvin interrupted gently. Particularly if you could demonstrate that your skills would benefit more children by remaining here than by relocating to Oregon. Meredith glanced at Caleb, who had remained silent during this exchange. Did you know about this proposal? Not the specifics, he answered honestly, though Father and I have discussed the need for permanent educational facilities as the ranch expands. Calvin rose, moving toward his desk. I'll leave you two to discuss the implications. The official proposal won't be finalized until spring, so there's time for consideration. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, Miss O'Sullivan, you've transformed this ranch in ways that extend far beyond the schoolroom. I would be proud to have you remain as our permanent teacher, and in whatever other capacity might eventually develop. The pointed comment hung in the air as he departed, leaving Caleb and Meredith alone before the fire. Your father isn't known for subtlety, is he? Meredith said finally, a smile playing at her lips despite her evident confusion. Not when he's decided something is right, Caleb agreed, moving to sit beside her on the small sofa. But he would never pressure you to break a commitment you consider binding. The Oregon position represents something I've worked toward for years, she said quietly. Independence. Professional respect. Building something meaningful. I understand, Caleb replied, careful to keep disappointment from his voice. Your career is important. Your word is important. But, she continued, turning to face him fully, these months at Foster Ranch have shown me there are different paths to those same goals. Here, I've built a school from nothing. Watched children who couldn't read master complex texts. Established educational standards where none existed. Hope stirred in his chest. And personally? Her expression softened. Personally, I've discovered connections I never expected. With the community. With the land itself. She hesitated, then added softly, with you. Caleb took her hand gently. Meredith, I would never ask you to choose between your professional ambitions and personal happiness. They shouldn't be mutually exclusive. In an ideal world, perhaps, she sighed. But women rarely have the luxury of having everything they desire. What if you could, he asked, gathering his courage. Have everything, professional fulfillment, respected position, and personal happiness. That would require a rather specific set of circumstances, she replied, watching him carefully. Such as permanent establishment of Foster Ranch School, with you as its headmistress and primary teacher. He paused, heart racing. And perhaps, if you were amenable, as my wife. The word hung between them. Wife. Transforming their careful courtship into something more definite, more permanent. Caleb, she said softly, her honey brown eyes wide. Are you proposing? Not officially. Not yet. He squeezed her hand gently. That would come with a ring, on bended knee, when the time is right. But I want you to know my intentions. To understand that when you weigh your decision about Oregon against staying here, my heart and my future are part of what Foster Ranch offers. Tears glistened in her eyes, but her smile was radiant. You continue to surprise me, Caleb Foster. Most men would have made demands, issued ultimatums. I'm not most men, he replied simply. And you're not most women. You deserve the freedom to make this decision based on what truly matters to you. Not obligation, not pressure, but genuine desire. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his in a gesture of intimate trust. I need time. To write to Oregon. To explore possibilities for honorably changing my commitment. To be certain my decision is made for the right reasons. Take all the time you need, he promised. I'll be here, supporting whatever choice you make. As the fire crackled and snow continued falling outside, Caleb and Meredith sat together in comfortable silence, the future stretching before them with both uncertainty and promise. Whatever decision she reached would come from careful thought and honest examination of her own heart, a process Caleb respected as much as he respected the remarkable woman undertaking it. Spring arrived at Foster Ranch in a riot of wildflowers and new growth, the harsh winter giving way to renewal across the landscape. In the schoolhouse, windows stood open to fresh breezes as children completed their year-end assessments under Meredith's watchful eye. The past months had brought significant developments. Calvin's correspondence with Cheyenne officials had resulted in preliminary approval for Foster Ranch School's official recognition, contingent upon facility improvements and curriculum standards Meredith had already begun implementing. More personally, her exchange of letters with the Oregon Committee had finally reached resolution. After explaining the educational impact she was having at Foster Ranch and proposing an alternative candidate, a qualified teacher from her Cincinnati college who eagerly sought Western opportunity, Meredith had received their reluctant agreement to release her from her contract. The letter releasing her had arrived yesterday. She hadn't yet told Caleb, wanting to complete the school term properly before addressing their future. As the children completed their final examination, Meredith watched them with pride. In 7 months, they had advanced remarkably. Reading levels improved, mathematical skills strengthened, horizons broadened through science and history. Whatever decision she made about her personal future, this educational achievement represented meaningful success. The school day ended with emotional farewells, not final goodbyes, as summer break would last only 6 weeks, but heartfelt appreciation from children who had come to adore their dedicated teacher. When the last student departed, Meredith remained alone in the schoolhouse, organizing materials and reflecting on all that had transpired since her arrival. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Caleb stood in the doorway, hat in hand, sunlight catching the auburn highlights in his chestnut hair. "Successful end to the term?" he asked, entering at her welcoming gesture. "Very much so," she replied, pride evident in her voice. Every child advanced at least 2 grade levels in reading. Most progressed even further in mathematics. Thanks to their extraordinary teacher. He smiled, moving to help her stack textbooks. Father received the official notification this morning. Foster Ranch School has been approved for territorial recognition, with construction of a proper schoolhouse to begin next month. "That's wonderful news," she said sincerely. "It is." He paused, studying her expression. "Though it does raise questions about who will lead this new school." Meredith took a deep breath. "I received a letter from Oregon yesterday. They've accepted my withdrawal and approved my replacement candidate." Joy leapt into Caleb's eyes, though he controlled his response with careful restraint. "That's significant news. May I ask what convinced them?" "The mathematics was quite persuasive," she replied with a small smile. 23 children educated here versus 18 in Oregon. Established community support versus starting anew. Territorial recognition opening possibilities for expansion. Purely logical considerations, then? He asked, echoing their conversation from months ago. "Those were the arguments I presented to the committee," she acknowledged. "But my personal reasons were perhaps less mathematical and more." She hesitated, then finished softly, "Matters of the heart." Caleb moved closer, hope evident in his expression. "Would you be willing to elaborate on those considerations?" "I discovered that Oregon represented an idea of independence and purpose," she explained carefully. "But Foster Ranch has become the actual fulfillment of those desires. Here, I've built something meaningful, connected with a community, found work that challenges and satisfies me." "And," he prompted gently. "And," she continued, meeting his gaze directly, "I've found someone who respects my independence while offering partnership, who values my mind as much as my heart, who gave me freedom to choose my own path, while making it very clear which path he hoped I'd select." The joy that had been building in Caleb's expression broke through completely, transforming his features. "Does this mean what I hope it means?" "It means," Meredith said, moving to stand before him, "that I'm officially accepting the position as headmistress of Foster Ranch School. Permanently." "And unofficially?" he asked, voice dropping to a near whisper as he took her hands in his. "Unofficially," she replied with a smile that illuminated her entire being. "I'm ready for that official proposal you mentioned some months ago. The one involving a ring and bended knee." Caleb's laugh was pure joy as he reached into his pocket, producing a small velvet box. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment." He dropped to one knee before her, opening the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. Elegant, distinctive, perfect for a woman who valued substance over show. "Meredith O'Sullivan," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "From the moment I saw you standing among those lost wagons, copper hair shining in the sunlight, you've captured my heart and mind in equal measure. Your courage, your intelligence, your dedication to others, everything about you has made me a better man. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears glistened in her honey-brown eyes as she nodded. "Yes, Caleb Foster. Yes, I will." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood to gather her in his arms. Their kiss, tender at first, then deepening with the passion they'd held in check through months of proper courtship, sealed promises that had been building since that first meeting on the Wyoming prairie. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, Meredith rested her hand against his cheek. I never expected this outcome when our wagon train lost its way. Sometimes getting lost is the only way to find where you truly belong, he replied, covering her hand with his own. Outside the schoolhouse window, Foster Ranch stretched in all directions. Cattle grazing on spring green pastures, cowboys riding the boundaries, the main house standing solid against the backdrop of distant mountains. A future neither had anticipated awaited them, built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and love that had grown from unexpected beginnings into something as enduring as the land itself. The mathematical teacher and the rancher's son had found their shared equation, one whose solution promised a lifetime of discovery, challenge, and joy in equal measure.